Okay, now we've got it. I don't know what happened there. All righty. Oh, it's Friday again. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Erina.
And I'm Kathleen Si'ulua. Great to be with you here this Friday.
Yes, what's today? Friday, March the 17th.
And we do apologise for the slight delay and the late start. We had my technical difficulties.
I know. We got there in the end. So Kathleen and I are both registered migration agents. If you're new to seeing our lives on a Friday, we try to, well, we do. Every Friday we come and do a live unless it's a public holiday. And we talk about anything immigration within our experience with what we see each week. And we try to bring some education and awareness around this area. So both Kathleen and I were born in New Zealand. Kath's been actually living in Australia though since the 70s.
Late 70s, yes, late 70s.
Late 70s, and I moved here with my family in 2007. So both Kath and I, being New Zealand citizens, are kind of, years apart in coming to live in Australia, and the laws were different for both of us. Even though we're New Zealand citizens, those laws were different because of the different timeframes and how laws applied back in the past. So Kath and I really like to talk about how immigration does affect New Zealand citizens and their family members. And today we're going to be taking you through explaining how evidence of Australian citizenship works and what this means for children born in Australia. So we'll be focusing on children born in Australia because this is a question we often get asked, and we can provide assistance, but we really do enjoy providing education around this area. So we've got some slides to share with you today, like a PowerPoint presentation. If you're someone who is wanting to know more about this area, you might have had children born in Australia, or someone in your family has had children born in Australia, and you've always heard lots of different stories about whether they are Australian citizens or not. Perhaps you follow a variety of Facebook pages or other social media that talk about immigration. That can be very confusing, particularly if you're kind of reading comments and commentary from people who are not professionals in this industry. So lots of people do talk about this area, but they can get their details and information that they share confused very easily, and that's because it is so complex, this area of migration and citizenship law. So we'll be focusing on citizenship law, but we'll be sharing some of the tips and general information about how you might work out whether your child or children are Australian citizens. So
can I just mention something, Erina? Just that this is based on current legislation, under the current Citizenship Act laws. So we are providing this information as it stands today. And I think we've had a question already in the comments section about, is this current, based on current law? There are no changes that we are aware of relating to what we will be sharing today, as today. But of course, immigration law is forever changing, and this is something that we will always share with you. When things change, we will share with you either via our live or via our other social media platforms about changes. But today's presentation is based on current Citizenship Act laws. So rest assured, we are providing you with current information.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll get straight into it because this will take us a little while to go through. We do leave our videos up. We'll probably share this one to our YouTube channel as well. So you can go back and review it if you to. Okay, I'm going to share
And if people have got questions, they can just drop them into the comment section and we can try and address them as we go through the presentation today.
Yeah, that's right. Hang on, I'm just looking around with this screen share at the moment. I'll bring the screen over to the main screen so that I'm not looking sideways the whole time. All right. Now I'll share it. Let me know if you can see that.
Yep, it's coming
Good.
through nice and clearly.
And I'll move that there. Okay, so if you've joined us, welcome. We hope you enjoy our presentation today. We did talk about, I think last week or in the last few weeks, that we wanted to bring this type of presentation. We've done this a couple of times in different ways over probably the last year or so, but it is forever evolving and changing. So we do like to try and keep everyone up to date with how things are. So today we're going to be talking about evidence of Australian citizenship. It might be a term that you've heard, maybe you haven't heard it. We'll explain what it means shortly. And this has been designed especially for children of New Zealand citizens, but it can apply to people of any immigration status. But we do specialise in the New Zealand area because New Zealanders are treated quite differently. So if you get it right for New Zealanders, you might get it right for everyone else too. So it does help. Okay, and Kath and I will go through and we'll just share. Okay, now we're going to try and, here we go. Hopefully I didn't do too many questions, we're going to be careful. So as we said at the beginning, Kath and I are both registered migration agents. That means we have completed the formal studies. We have made sure that we keep up with all of our professional requirements and licensing requirements, etc., etc. I've been practicing for going on 6 years, and Kath has joined us just over a year ago. But Kathleen's background is that she worked in immigration for about 10 years. So although Kath's only been a migration agent technically for 12 months, 14 months maybe.
Just over, yeah.
Yeah. Kath does have a wealth of experience behind her and knowledge about immigration. So it's been great to have her join me and have a colleague to be able to bounce ideas off. Do you want to just explain a little bit about your background too, Kath?
Yeah, so I am, my parents are originally from Tonga and I was born in New Zealand, but I think I was about 1 year old when I travelled with my parents to Australia. So I've been in Australia ever since then. And I joined the public service once I finished my studies, and one of those departments was the Department of Immigration and Citizenship. And it was a time when there was lots of change in the department, and I enjoyed my time a lot during my work in immigration. I guess that just stayed with me over the years, and people would always ask questions. Friends, family, colleagues would always ask questions about immigration related issues. So I always had a bit of a passion, always was interested in keeping up to date with the latest immigration rules and visas. And so it just was a natural progression eventually to study and want to change my career from working in public service for over 20 years. But probably starting myself also came going through the visa process myself when my husband applied to migrate to Australia. So we had to go through the partner visa process. So I know about going through the visa process, same as Erina. She knows about having to go and apply for a visa and also having to wait the outcome of that visa. And it's not, your life kind of is on hold, isn't it, Erina? When we're waiting for that decision to come back from the department. So we do feel your pain, and I think that's why we make such great registered migration agents, because we too have been through the process, and we want to make and help our people to understand the processes and also to apply for the right visas so that they can meet their immigration goals here in Australia. So yeah, that's just a little about me, and I'm just so grateful to be working with Erina. This is a difficult industry to join, especially if you're working on your own. Being part of the migration team has really allowed me to learn in a really safe environment, and to also learn from an experienced migration agent to help guide me through this new area that I've just recently joined. So if you're interested in becoming a registered migration agent, we'd be happy to share our experiences and share our pathway that we went through. So by all means, give us an email or drop us a phone call. We'd be more than happy to share how you can become a registered migration agent here in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a little fun fact, if you look at our what's called our MARN numbers, so that's Migration Agent Registration Number, I think that's what it stands for. Am I right, Kath? I always get
yeah, so many acronyms.
Yeah, I know. A little fun fact, we all have a special number, and the first two digits of the number let you know what year we started, so what year we first registered. So mine starts with the number 17. Those first two digits, that means I registered in 2017. Kath starts with 22, which means she first registered in 2022. For those that might be interested to know that. All right. So our aim today is to talk about children who are born in Australia. There is another area, of course, for children who weren't born in Australia, but we won't be covering that today. That will be something for another time that we'll talk about. But for the purposes of our presentation today, we'll just focus on children who were born in Australia. And there's two key aims we want to help you with today. And the first one is how to assess when a child is eligible to apply for an Australian Citizenship Certificate. So that's what we're talking about today, is evidence of citizenship is really the term used when applying for an Australian Citizenship Certificate. And the other part we want to share with you is how to apply for an Australian Citizenship Certificate. So we don't mind sharing this information. As a job, we do a lot of applications for people on their behalf. So people that don't want to do it themselves, they want a professional to do it for them. For whatever reason, we do offer that type of service. But again, for the purpose of our presentation today, we're going to share with you our little secrets about how we do things. And for those out there that want to do it themselves, hopefully this will give you a good starting point on first, how to assess the child's eligible, and secondly, how do you go about getting this Australian Citizenship Certificate? Isn't that right, Kath?
That's right. This is a topic that we get questioned about every week, and this is why it's so important for us to share this information, particularly for those who have been here, living here for over 10 years, families who've been living here, who've had children born here, have been living here for over 10 years. This is information that the department actually, pushes out to to people in general. So that's why we feel it's important to share it, because it's not also that well known. And so hopefully this will be helpful for those parents who've had children born here in Australia.
Yeah, and just as a little aside, this can go for anybody and everybody. So not just children born to New Zealand citizens or Pacific Islanders, or it's actually really helpful for people who are children of Australian citizens, believe it or not, because Australia is made up largely of migrants, and the Citizenship Department have an enormous job in keeping an accurate record of who is an Australian citizen and who isn't. But because they have such an enormous job, they can't just possibly know who is and who isn't. And the reason why this process is so important is because it allows people to have solid evidence that they are Australian citizens, particularly throughout their life, for things such as renewing your Australian passport or having to provide evidence that you're an Australian citizen. An Australian Citizenship Certificate has become more important, probably, I would say, in the last five plus years than ever before. And that's because there are a lot of misunderstandings, misinformation, and even from what we've seen, even from within the government department areas, they can also get it wrong as well. And probably a big reason for that is because a lot of the staff are not specifically trained in citizenship law. So, you know, public servants don't necessarily have that deeper training and understanding, and trends and processes can become blurred, and sometimes they can go right off track, and people get assessed incorrectly based on you know, lack of knowledge and lack of skills from within government departments. So it's really important to try and get the right information, which is why we do push and encourage people to get professional advice. Don't rely on government departments, because they are administrators, they're not necessarily trained specifically. It's a bit like, I always say, it's like going to the ATO. You can't ask them for advice around tax and things like that. They won't be able to provide you with specific advice because they're not all chartered accountants or tax consultants. Okay, so it's the same kind of thing. All right, I'll click the button, Kath, if you want to go to the next slide.
So our learning outcomes really for today are simple. It's to understand and apply the eligibility criteria, and also how to make an application.
Nice. And before we proceed, we just want to make sure that everyone that's watching this understands that what we're sharing today is general information only, okay? Everyone's case is different. What we want to share with you today is some of the common criteria that should help point you in the right direction. If you find that your case is a little bit outside of the scope of what we're talking about, it's likely that you probably need to get specialist advice in your situation. But for general purposes, this should help a large group of people that might see this. And yeah, sorry, Kath, you go.
Absolutely, because then if you watch this presentation, it might actually help you to ask the right questions as well when you are going to seek advice from a registered migration agent. Because often it's hard to ask, to know what you have to ask to get the answers that are specific for your situation. So hopefully this general overview will give you an idea, a starting point from where to go.
Yeah. And as we've said here, we always recommend seeking professional assistance due to the complex and ever-changing nature of migration and citizenship legislation and processes. So even right now, there are changes in the wings, and we are going with what's current right now, but these things could change. So that's another reason why it is good to speak to a professional. And who are the professionals? Professionals are registered migration agents or immigration lawyers, or sometimes there's some people who are exempt from being a registered migration agent or immigration lawyer if they have been exempt and they've got an exemption, but they do have the knowledge and the support to be able to provide advice. Anyone outside of that, apart from you can have an immediate family member assist you, but anything outside of that is actually breaking the law. And that's because a lot of people over the years have been, they've been not damaged, is the word. I'm trying to find the right word. They've had their issues basically devastated by poor advice. And so our industry is heavily regulated. We can, people can put complaints forward about us very, very easily. It's very hard to complain about someone who's not registered or not licensed, because the authorities really focus on us who are licensed. But there are a lot of people out there who are operating illegally or giving people the impression that they are qualified to speak on these things and provide assistance. And there's also people charging fees, which is again breaking the law. So just make sure that when you do seek professional assistance, if that's the way you want to go, you learn the skills of how to find out who's qualified and who's not, and who's able to help you.
And most importantly, someone who is exempt, as you mentioned earlier, Erina, they are actually not allowed to charge a fee. So registered immigration agents and immigration lawyers are allowed to charge a fee because, you know, we are registered, we've gone through the process of obtaining relevant education to do this work, but someone who's exempt, they are not really allowed to charge a fee to assist you.
And you might see people with exemptions who work for members of parliament, for example.
Other agencies.
Yeah, or they may work for some kind of charitable organisation, or what do they call NGOs? Non-government,
non-profit
organisations.
Non-government organisations.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's get into this. Who can apply? Who can apply for an Australian Citizenship Certificate? And the answer is quite simple: only Australian citizens.
Yep.
So you have to be an Australian citizen before you can apply for an Australian Citizenship Certificate. Now, it's a little bit like applying for a birth certificate. You have a right to apply for a birth certificate in the country that you were born in. In Australia, you have a right to apply for your Australian Citizenship Certificate if you are an Australian citizen already. So you would not apply for an Australian Citizenship Certificate if you're not an Australian citizen. But just to help not confuse that, when people apply for Australian citizenship, and if they are eligible and they are granted Australian citizenship, they are then given an Australian Citizenship Certificate. What we're talking about here is anyone who is an Australian citizen is able to apply for Australian Citizenship Certificate, not just for people who are born in Australia, actually. So there is a bit of a grey area there, so people might get a bit confused. Anyone who's an Australian citizen, whether they were born here, got it through what's called conferral or naturalisation, they might have got Australian citizenship by descent. Anyone who is already an Australian citizen can apply for an Australian Citizenship Certificate or apply for a new certificate if they may have lost their previous one or it got destroyed. You can do this one, Kath.
Yeah, there is some prior knowledge needed before you apply for evidence of Australian citizenship. And we're going to just introduce to you some important terms so that you have a better understanding when you go through the form. It's likely that you'll see these terms mentioned in the form. So it's best to have a good, clear understanding of what these terms mean. So some of these terms that we're going to go through. The first term, an Australian citizen. The second term we will talk about as well is what is a permanent Australian permanent resident. And of course, we'll be talking about, you'll see the term eligible New Zealand citizen mentioned as well, also known as a protected special category visa holder subclass TY444. Now, this last term is probably a term that we often hear people get confused about because of the term eligible, and sometimes we just assume it has the natural dictionary meaning, but it actually, in immigration law, it actually refers to a very specific group of people, group of New Zealand citizens that came to Australia. Are we going to talk more about that in the next slide, Edna?
No. So the prior knowledge, to get the full I guess, gist of what we're going to share today. So these are the things you have to understand. We're not going to go deeply into these. There is information on our website about who is an eligible New Zealand citizen. As a New Zealander, if you're watching this, that's a really, really important term to understand. So go to our website and we'll share our link to the website at the end. But yeah, if you need to get your head around that. For anyone else that doesn't fit that category, if you're a New Zealand citizen, you are what's known as a non-protected SCV holder, or just a straight 444 visa holder without the eligible kind of title. So we've just used those abbreviations for, and we'll continue on with these throughout. I think that's all. Yeah. You get this one, Kath?
So the first general rule of thumb that we want to talk to you about is that children are Australian citizens at birth if they are born to at least one parent who is either an Australian citizen or an Australian permanent resident or an eligible New Zealand citizen. That term that we talked about again, also known as a protected special category visa holder. So this is the rule. If one of your one parent is an Australian citizen or permanent resident or an eligible New Zealand citizen, and they have a child here in Australia, Australian-born child, the rule of thumb is that child then is an Australian citizen at birth.
That's right. And we're going to run through some scenarios towards the end of this presentation to give you some kind of, made up.
Yeah. At the time of their birth, any children born parent is one of those. They are an Australian citizen at birth.
Yes, that's right. And the second general rule of thumb is around the 10th birthday rule, which you may have heard of. If you haven't, there is another area of the Citizenship Act that grants children citizenship on their 10th birthday by what's called operation of law, which in, I guess, layman's terms is automatically. However, the problem is that although a child may be granted Australian citizenship on their 10th birthday, you would never be notified by the Citizenship Department. So it is up to you to apply for a copy of your child's citizenship certificate so that you have got that evidence for them. And they will need that throughout their lifetime. So yeah, that's why this is really important to understand, because a lot of people think that, I don't know, I guess they might assume that something happens on their 10th birthday. You might receive a letter in the mail or email, or something gets alerted with births, deaths and marriages. Nothing like that happens. It's up to you to do that.
That's right. So it's not applying for Australian citizenship. You are just applying for evidence of that your child's Australian citizen, because it just happens automatically on their 10th birthday. So, for those who've been here for more than 10 years, you've got children that were born here. It doesn't matter which country you've come from. It doesn't matter what your citizenship or what your visa status is. Any child born here in Australia and has lived here ordinarily for those full 10 years becomes a citizen on their 10th birthday.
Yes, that's
automatically.
So when we talk about the second general rule of thumb, every other child born in Australia, and it doesn't matter if they're New Zealand parents or any other immigration status, but every other child born in Australia, they may have been granted Australian citizenship on their 10th birthday by operation of law, which is what I said before, subject to meeting residency criteria, which is what Kathleen just explained. You must have been ordinarily resident in Australia from birth to their 10th birthday. Now, that in itself can be quite complex. So it may not necessarily mean you had to physically have been in Australia, but you had to have been what's considered ordinarily resident under the law. And there are specific guidelines around that. So, for example, you might have been traveling around the world for 3 years in that first 10 years of your child's birth, but you were still ordinarily resident in Australia. Australia was still your home base. In those type of
Yes.
cases, the department may do an assessment, and also satisfied with the evidence and the explanations, they may still grant your child citizenship on their 10th birthday. But yeah, you've got to go through a bit of a process. So don't think that if you've been overseas traveling or you know, for a variety of reasons, if Australia was still ordinarily your home and you can prove that and you've got lots of evidence to support that, then it's worth you know, getting trying for it.
And holidays are fine. Going out, you know, for holidays, temporary holidays, that's fine, because you had your home base here in Australia and came, you know, you lived here permanently, went out temporarily. Holidays are fine. It's those big moves where you've cut all ties, you've decided no more Australia, and you've just taken the family to another country. That's where it will be difficult for you to possibly prove that you were that your child was ordinarily resident for the full 10 years.
Yeah. I should mention there's a lot of grandparents across Australia that want to know if their morphals or their grandchildren are Australian citizens. So this is great for families and grandparents, because we do get asked often by grandparents. It seems to be grandparents ask more than parents, actually. So we'll talk about some of the eligibility criteria. There's a few big questions that we'll go through. So when thinking about whether a child is an Australian citizen at birth or on their 10th birthday, these are the questions that you would want to start with. So we'll step you through them one by one and break it down. So the very first big question is, was the child born in Australia? Okay, remember I said that at the beginning, and even though that might seem obvious to some people they forget that that's where the tangent that we're going down. This is only for children born in Australia. So if yes, you may proceed to the next question, because there will be another question after that. But if no, we recommend you seek professional immigration advice. And that's because even though children weren't born in Australia, sometimes they may be able to access citizenship by descent, or it's hard to say. We couldn't provide comment on that without assessing further details. But generally speaking, this is for children that were born in Australia. If yes, you may proceed. Okay, you want to go through this one, Kath?
Yeah, so the next question is to ask, was either of the child's parents an Australian citizen or an Australian permanent resident or an eligible New Zealand citizen? Just one of the parents needs to have this status at the time of the child's birth.
Yeah. And that's really important, isn't it? It's at the time of the child's birth, not after the child was born. Sometimes parents become citizens after the child's birth because they've got a pathway. When you do that, it doesn't mean that your child automatically can become a citizen with you. So it's really important to understand at the time of the child's birth. So again, the answer was yes, the child is an Australian citizen at birth. So running through that criteria, what Kathleen just went through. So if either of the parents or both of the parents were an Australian citizen, a permanent resident, or an eligible New Zealand citizen, in general terms, the child is a citizen at birth. Now, just to say, I haven't included it in our slides because there is some historical types of criteria as well that we haven't included because we didn't want to go too in depth and confuse people and get them lost. But just for those that might be interested, if you were born before a certain period in 1986 in Australia, the 10-year rule didn't apply prior to then. So children born prior to August 1986 were actually Australian citizens at birth, regardless of the parents' immigration status. So that's just something aside from that, but generally we're speaking about children born after 86 and how the rules apply.
Yeah, so if you're an Australian citizen at birth, you can apply for your Australian citizenship Australian Citizenship Certificate immediately. You know, you don't need to wait. That's something that you can do as soon as your child is born.
Yeah, and I mean, we deal with cases where people are now fully grown adults that were born in Australia but don't know if they're Australian citizens themselves because their parents may have applied for citizenship by descent of another country, such as New Zealand, and they've got them a passport of that country. So they're unsure if their child is actually an Australian citizen, even though they were born here. And those cases are really important to get right. And if those people have got a New Zealand passport or passport of another country, citizenship of another country, but they were born in Australia, it is definitely worth looking into getting the right advice. And we do encourage you to get an Australian Citizenship Certificate because it is a very, very, very important document. And if we get time, we might run into a few, be able to explain a couple of scenarios, but in general, it's just important. Trust us on that one. And if the answer was no, that, you know, neither parent was an Australian citizen or a permanent resident or an eligible New Zealand citizen, then, but the child was born in Australia, that's okay. You can proceed to the next question. So
Step 4, just remind people, has the child ordinarily resided in Australia from birth to their 10th birthday? To their 10th birthday, as we said, ordinarily resident, meaning that this was the, you know, the home country, this was the base, and you know, you may have gone out temporarily for a holiday, but you always return back here to Australia.
Yeah, that's right. So if your answer is yes, the child was born in Australia and the child was ordinarily resident in Australia for the first 10 years of their life, that means they grew up here, they would have gone to school here, right up to their 10th birthday. If the answer is yes, then they were made an Australian citizen on their 10th birthday by operation of law, but that won't necessarily be activated if you don't apply for an Australian Citizenship Certificate. And I guess for people that might be curious about, well, what happens if I don't do it by their 10th birthday, or I don't do it and, you know, they're now 20 or 30 or even 40. The thing is, that's okay. There is no time limit that you have to apply for the citizenship certificate. You can do it at any point in time. But just know that if your child is an Australian citizen on their 10th birthday, you need to provide evidence of that. And we'll talk about evidence towards the end of our presentation. When a child gets older and becomes an adult, it can be trickier to provide that type of information. For example, immunisation records, you may not have those anymore. You may not be able to go to the school that your child attended because the school no longer exists anymore. So sometimes you can go to school and get a copy, or, you know, get them to write a letter to confirm that your child was enrolled between certain dates. People do ask, can you use movement records? Movement records are helpful, but we know from experience that the department don't accept movement records on their own, which is why you need this other type of evidence. And if you can't prove that first 10 years, you can run the risk of not being recognised as an Australian citizen. So, you know, we recommend if you do it whilst your children are young, then that's the best time to do it because it's easier to get the evidence that you need.
Yeah.
Okay.
If the answer was no, that, you know, your child, even though they were born here, they were not ordinarily resident here, then the child is likely to not be an Australian citizen. So this is where you would then, however, seek professional advice so that there may be some other ways that your child can then become an Australian citizen, or other strategies may need to be developed and employed in order to help your child become an Australian citizen. So there's, you know, don't give up hope. Just try and get some professional help to assist you with your child's circumstances.
Yeah. Okay, the second big question is, was the child an Australian citizen at birth or on their 10th birthday? So once you've assessed the child was born in Australia, what status either of the parents were, and understanding that, then the next big question is, so the child was born in Australia, and they were ordinarily resident, were they an Australian citizen at birth or on their 10th birthday? And it's important to understand the difference, because that will also have a flow-on effect to when you're doing the application, or if you get us or someone else to do the application, you need to be able to provide the right types of evidence, because the evidence won't be the same. The types of documentation that you need to provide won't be exactly the same, be different. What have I done here? I think, yeah. What have I done there? Oh, yeah. So if they're born there, then if yes to all of those scenarios, they're born to either an Australian citizen, permanent resident, eligible New Zealand citizen, or they lived here ordinarily for the first 10 years of their life from 0 to 10th birthday, then the child, the answer is yes, the child is eligible to apply for an Australian Citizenship Certificate. And also, it's not added in these slides, but if children were born before August, 20th of August, I think it is from memory, 1986, they're also Australian citizens at birth. Okay, do you want to go through this one, Kath? I'll help you with this one.
This is a wonderful diagram that Erina has come up with that hopefully will just give you an overview, a snapshot of just how to make decisions and how to come to a conclusion about whether your child is an Australian citizen at birth or on their 10th birthday, and also what to do if they are not an Australian citizen at birth. So you can see here, we come down, was the child born in Australia? The answer, and you say yes, if we're looking at the left part of the chart. We then ask the question, was the parent an Australian citizen or permanent resident or an eligible New Zealand citizen? If the answer is yes, we know that I started wrong. Sorry. Was the child born in Australia? First question is, was either parent an Australian citizen, permanent resident, or an eligible New Zealand citizen? And if that is a yes, it can be that your child is an Australian citizen at birth. Or if no, then you'd have to wait for the 10-year rule to apply, and that your child will be an Australian citizen on their 10th birthday. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that where it says yes for the 10th birthday, that should be a no yes.
Yes.
And I did originally have it as a no, but it was kind of like, well, that's still a yes. I probably should put both a no and a yes there, because if neither parent was an Australian citizen or permanent resident or eligible New Zealand citizen, then they still become an Australian citizen on the 10th birthday.
That's it.
Yeah.
But if neither of the parents were an Australian citizen when the child was born, then of course you'd have to check. Maybe it might be that the Australian child can apply for Australian citizenship through descent. That might be one avenue for them to obtain Australian citizenship. But if neither of the parents were an Australian citizen, permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen, then of course, please do seek professional advice, because it may be they'll have to apply for a permanent resident visa first before they can apply for Australian citizenship. So hopefully that's, we didn't confuse you too much. But you guys are smart, you know what we mean.
Yeah, so that branch with the no, if the child's not born in Australia, then, you know, your question is, was either parent an Australian citizen at the time the child was born? So that's when you go branch off into, they might be able to apply for citizenship by descent. And
Yep.
we don't cover that in this presentation, because that's another area to go off into. But if no, that's when we again recommend professional advice. And I have to say, I've been doing this for many years, and creating flowcharts is not easy when it comes to immigration. There is always an exception to the rule. There is always something that's almost like a, what's it called, oxymoron. There's two opposites that meet. So that's why it is important to get some general, some professional advice.
Yeah.
When we provide general information, just be aware that there are no absolutes. So even if you think, oh yeah, this, I've got this, just be careful, because there's possibly something else that we haven't shared, because there's lots of ifs, buts and maybes. Yeah. Good job, Kathleen.
Probably we can mention at this point is that we can help you do the assessment for free.
Yeah.
And should we see that there might be one of these, ifs, buts, maybes that, will require more of an assessment, we'll let you know whether you should seek further professional advice for your particular situation. But if you have a child and you just want to know, are they an Australian citizen? They were born here. If they were born here, we can help you make that assessment as to whether they can apply for an Australian Citizenship Certificate. And you can do that by booking a free 10-minute callback on our website. And you can book in a time for one of us to give you a call back to help you do that assessment.
Yeah, that doesn't take us long to work out for you. Okay, now here's some case studies that we're going to go through. So now that you've got that kind of background knowledge on the birth or 10-year rule, we're going to go through some actual case studies, and I think we've got three case studies, maybe 4. I can't remember now.
I think it's 4.
Oh, is it 4? Okay. All right. So this is case study number 1. We've called this one Jimmy. Jimmy was born in Sydney in 2009. His parents are both New Zealand citizens. They moved from New Zealand to Australia in 2008, so a year before he was born. It was the first time they had ever been to Australia in their life. Every year at Christmas time, Jimmy's parents take him back to New Zealand to visit family for 3 to 4 weeks at a time. So the question is Jimmy an Australian citizen? So before we jump into the yes and the no, we have to go through that process of asking the right questions first. So this is how you will unpack the criteria, I guess, so that you can work it out. So this is Jimmy's case. Key questions to ask. Was Jimmy born in Australia? Yes, we need to know that he was. At the time of the child's birth, were both parents New Zealand citizens? We know from the information they were. And were either parents also an Australian citizen or permanent resident at the time of his birth? The information that we've been given suggests that they're not, because it says they're New Zealand citizens and they've never been to Australia before. And were either parents eligible New Zealand citizens or protected SCV holders? Probably not, because they come in 2008 for the first time in their life. Did the child ordinarily reside in Australia from birth until his 10th birthday? So those are the questions you would start to go through. You pull apart the information that you've been given, and what was that? So always start by answering the key questions. So here we go, weighing up the yeses and the nos and how to go through. So in Jimmy's case, was either parent an Australian citizen, permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen at the time of his birth, yes or no? Did Jimmy ordinarily reside in Australia from birth until his 10th birthday? And is Jimmy eligible to apply for evidence of citizenship? So let's go and work out what the answer actually is for Jimmy. So you may have worked this out already, and we'd love to know how people kind of, based on that pre-information that we've given you. Because Jimmy was born in Australia after the February 2001, and his parents were New Zealand citizens, And if you're wondering why I'm mentioning February 2001, if you do the read up about eligible New Zealand citizens, you'll understand why I'm talking about that. That's a significant date to be aware of. And his parents weren't eligible New Zealand citizens, and he resided in Australia for the first 10 years of his life. So he was born in Australia after 2001. His parents were New Zealand citizens, but they weren't eligible New Zealand citizens. He did reside in Australia, or ordinarily reside in Australia for the first 10 years of his life. So does that make him an Australian citizen? And the answer is yes. If you guessed yes, or if you thought yes, then you're correct. He is an Australian citizen at on his 10th birthday. And note, his yearly trips were for holidays only and not to live. That's why he resided in Australia for the first 10 years of his life, even though if you calculate 3 to 4 weeks across 10 years, 30 to 40 weeks, it's almost a year out of the country. But that time doesn't count. Okay, do you want to do this one?
Yeah, sure. So case study number 2. Aroha. Aroha was born in Brisbane in 2008. Aroha's parents are both New Zealand citizens. Her father has been living in Australia since 2007. Her mother has been living in Australia since 1999. Now, neither of her parents have actually applied for a permanent visa or for Australian citizenship. Is Aroha an Australian citizen? So let's go through the questions again. Let's walk through this one just so we make sure we come to the right conclusion. So the key questions ask, was Aroha born in Australia? Yes, we know she was born in Brisbane. At the time of Aroha's birth, were both her parents New Zealand citizens? They were indeed New Zealand citizens. Were either of her parents also an Australian citizen, permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen, or a protected SCV holder? That's a question that is important. And then the last question is, did Aroha ordinarily reside in Australia from birth to her 10th birthday? So based on the information we've got so far, what are your thoughts so far? Start by answering the key questions, remember. First key question is, was either parent an Australian citizen, permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen at the time of Aroha's birth? We've got to remember that the scenario said that the father came after 2001, but Aroha's mother was actually here in 1999. So keep those facts in your mind as we ask the question. As we move on to the next question, did Aroha ordinarily reside in Australia from birth until her 10th birthday? Yes, she did. Interestingly enough, she did. And then the last question, is Aroha eligible to apply for evidence of Australian citizenship? So what are you all thinking? If anyone is still watching, maybe put your answers in the comment section to get your thoughts. No one's going to get any punishment if your answer is wrong. Put your thoughts down there. What are you thinking? Is Aroha eligible to apply for an evidence of Australian Citizenship Certificate? Wow, Luella, good going. Yes, everyone's getting it. Wonderful. Thanks, Lev and Huihana. Thank you. You guys get 100%. So we'll just go through. We know that Aroha's mother had been living continuously in Australia prior to February 2001. That date is so important because therefore Aroha is the child of an eligible New Zealand citizen or a protected special category visa holder. So therefore, she was an Australian citizen at birth. So I think that's one criteria when you're assessing children is always to look at the parent. What was the status of the parents when you're trying to assess someone, an Australian-born child, if they were an Australian citizen at birth? So if they were an Australian citizen at birth, you know that one of the parents was either an eligible New Zealand citizen, Australian permanent resident, or an Australian citizen. Great work, guys. Thank you for helping me through that scenario.
Yeah, we go. And just a note on that. So when you know either parent wasn't a citizen or permanent resident or eligible New Zealand citizen, do you really need to then ask the question about did they live here for the first 10 years of their life? Because at that point, so long as you've got enough understanding of the rule of at birth or 10 years, if you understand that, you'll know that the 10-year question actually isn't important in this case. We don't need to know that because, I mean, Kathleen and I do ask these questions anyway, just to be doubly sure, extra sure, just in case that there might be something that people have forgotten, because people often will speak to us, give us their scenario, and they can forget things because it happened so long ago. They can sometimes forget. So we try to get good coverage just in case it was, you know, maybe they weren't ordinarily resident, or maybe they didn't, you know, they thought they came in 99, but they actually came after the law change in 2001. And because it is so long ago, we're talking over 20 years ago now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the part we're talking about. So Aroha doesn't need to adhere to the 10-year rule or provide evidence she was living in Australia for the first 10 years of her life. She doesn't need to do any of that. She doesn't need a letter from the school. She doesn't need immunisation records. Okay. Now this is Dylan. Dylan was born in Auckland, New Zealand in 2006. Then his parents moved September, October, a month later when he was only a month old. Mum's a New Zealand citizen, but she lived in Australia from 1988 to 1998. So she's actually spent 10 years of her life in Australia. Dad is also a New Zealand citizen and had not been to Australia until they moved in 2006. So that was his first time here. Question, is Dylan an Australian citizen? So we'll go through the questions to ask. And if you are still with us and you want to put in what you think, feel free to drop what you think the answer is as soon as you think you've worked it out. So was Dylan born in Australia? So we know that he was born in New Zealand. At the time of Dylan's birth, did either of his parents hold Australian citizenship? So where do we go with Dylan's one? So you always start by answering those key questions. Was he born in Australia? In his case, he wasn't. Oh, look, typo there, born in prison. Sorry, I need to go back and fix that. It was meant to be New Zealand. Here we go. Dylan born in New Zealand. So again, this is just another way of breaking it down. Was Dylan born in Australia? The answer is no. Were either of his parents Australian citizens at the time of his birth? The answer is no. Is Dylan eligible to apply for evidence of citizenship or an Australian Citizenship Certificate? So a few people come back. Huihana, no, he's not eligible. Luella, no. Yeah. So the answer is because Dylan was not born in Australia, he cannot possibly be an Australian citizen. So well done. Yes, all those people with their nose. That's exactly right. So when you are not born in Australia, you are not an Australian citizen at birth, even if you're born outside of Australia to Australian parents. So you can apply for Australian citizenship by descent, and that has to be approved and granted, but it's not possible to be an Australian citizen if you're born outside of Australia. So wasn't possible for Dylan. So, you know, we didn't have to go down the path of did he live here for the first 10 years, because he came here at a month old. And look, people do come to us and they say, you know, but, you know, my child or my grandchild has been here since they were a newborn or since they were a baby before they turned 1. I heard that they become citizens on their 10th birthday or after living here for 10 years. The reason we're going through this type of scenario is just to spell it out that, no, that's not how it works. Okay, so he can't possibly be an Australian citizen at birth or on his 10th birthday. Okay.
And everyone got that right. So great work, everyone.
Yeah, good job.
The migration agents listening to us right now.
All right, you want to do this last scenario?
Yeah, this is our last scenario, and we've got two brothers, Jacob and Michael. Now, Jacob was born in Auckland, New Zealand in 2002, and his father is listed as unknown. We know that his mother is a New Zealand citizen. She was actually in Australia for a brief visit on the 26th of February 2001. This is that magical date, special date for New Zealand citizens. She then returned to live in Australia in 2009 and gave birth to her second son, Michael, in Australia in 2010. Okay, we've got one son, Jacob, born in New Zealand, Michael, who is born here in Australia. And then we also know that Michael's father is a New Zealand citizen also, and he first came to Australia in 2009. So we're going to look at the status of these two brothers here as we go through the questions, okay? Let's go through the questions.
And I just want to say, I'm sharing, the reason I wrote this scenario is because I've actually dealt with a few cases like this or similar to this, not exactly like this, but similar to this.
And that's the other thing, just because, you know, your children will not necessarily have, be Australian citizens. So you've got to do that assessment for each one individually, depending on where they're born, status of parents, etc. So are either Jacob or Michael Australian citizens? Remember, Jacob born in 2002 in New Zealand, and we have Michael born in 2010 in Australia. So let's go with the key questions again. Let's start with Jacob. Was Jacob born in Australia? We know not. He was not. At the time of Jacob's birth, were his parents New Zealand citizens? Yes. Were either parent also an Australian citizen, permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen? Remember the date that his mum happened to be in Australia? Keep that in mind. And is there a last question on there? Did Jacob ordinarily reside in Australia from birth until his 10th birthday? We know he was born overseas, so think about that when you're answering that question. So let's move on. Very close to making the assessment if people have got thoughts. We're also going to look at Michael first before we come to the assessment part. But Michael, questions to ask. Was Michael born in Australia? You can say yes to that. At the time of Michael's birth, were either of his parents New Zealand citizens? We do know yes, that was the case. And were either parents also an Australian citizen, permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen? Yes, there was a special date, remember? And did Michael ordinarily reside in Australia from birth until his 10th birthday? We do have information about that as well. Okay, let us go to the answer now.
So if you're still with us,
yeah, and you're following along, you've got a view about Jacob and Michael's status as an Australian citizen or not, drop down your answer into the comments. We'd love to see what your views and thoughts are. And don't worry, no right or wrong. I mean, there is right or wrong answers, but who cares if you get it wrong? This is all part of our learning process as well. So just write down your answer and what your thoughts are. So let's go through the answer. We know that Jacob is not an Australian citizen because he was not born in Australia. We can just rule that off. He's just not, because he wasn't born in Australia. And then secondly, Michael?
Sorry. I was just seeing Hui Hannah's answer. Yes to Jacob due to mum's protected SCB, and yes to Michael. So she's saying yes. Now, Hui Hannah, I'm so glad you said that, because you're correct in recognising that mum is protected. But remember, he's not born in Australia. So even if his parents were Australian citizens and he was born outside of Australia, he can't be an Australian citizen at birth. The key for the Australian citizen, permanent resident and eligible New Zealand citizen is a child must be born in Australia to activate that citizenship at birth.
Yes.
But I really like your thinking there, because that you're spot on.
On the right track, yeah, absolutely. Recognising that date, the 26th of February 2001, just because she was just here on that date, she becomes an eligible New Zealand citizen. Yeah. But unfortunately, because Jacob was born overseas, was born in New Zealand, that doesn't actually make him an Australian citizen. Now, Michael is an Australian citizen because at birth, because as Huiana said, their mum was a eligible New Zealand citizen at the time he was born, so therefore it makes him an Australian citizen at birth. So that scenario has kind of really brought home the importance of where the child was born, status of parents as well, especially those New Zealand citizens who were here on that date may not have applied for anything, but because they were here before the 26th of February or on the 26th of February 2001, that gives them that special status, which then when they have children here in Australia, their children automatically become Australian citizens at birth.
Yeah.
All can apply for a citizenship certificate.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll share, this was a real life situation where I had a mum call me one day. This was about 5 years ago. And this was her situation. And she said, look, I've rung immigration and they told me that because I went back to New Zealand, then I no longer had, that protected status. Therefore, my second son that was born here is not an Australian citizen. When I went through her whole situation, the department was incorrect, and we see this often, and it's not to put the department down, but again, just reiterating, they are often not trained in migration and citizenship law. They are administrators, they are public servants, and their knowledge is very limited and often scripted on what they can and can't say. But sometimes I guess they might feel confident enough to give their view, but that's really dangerous because that's advice, and that shouldn't have happened. So thankfully she was able to get in contact with me, and I was able to assess her children correctly, and we were able to get her son that was born in Australia, we were able to get his Australian Citizenship Certificate within a couple of weeks. So that happened really quickly. But her oldest son, who was born with quite a severe disability, she had to go through the process of sponsoring him on a child visa, which was a bit risky because of his disability. And but she in herself needed to take the risk because she wanted to make sure that she did everything to help him with his status before he got too old. So he was actually only 6 months old when she moved back to Australia. And by the time I was talking to her, he was about 10 years old. And so, yeah, this does happen in real life. And so often people can be given incorrect information because they don't quite understand these differences. So thank you for participating, those people.
Yeah, everyone did wonderful.
Yeah. And let's talk about the information and evidence that's needed when you do make an application. So we're nearing the end of this. If you've stuck with us from the beginning, you've done really well. Okay, let's go. So every applicant will need to provide. So doesn't matter if it's a citizenship at birth or citizenship on their 10th birthday. There's some standard things that everybody has to provide. And that is a copy of your birth certificate to show that you're born in Australia. Your parents' identity documents, things such as passport, birth certificate, driver's license, marriage certificate, possibly travel records and or visa, proof of address. So that type of stuff parents need to provide. A passport-sized photograph, so passport size, passport quality, and identity declaration form called a Form 1195. Now you can Google this, Form 1195, you'll see it's called an identity declaration and it needs to be signed by a suitable witness. Also, the back of the photograph needs to be signed by the same witness that signs the form, and there is particular criteria around that. So the witness must have known the applicant or their parents for at least 12 months beforehand. The witness must be an Australian citizen, and they must be from a certain type of occupation. When you Google that form 1195 and pull it up, it'll give you a whole list of the occupations of people. So you can't just take it to a JP to sign unless the JP has known you for 12 months or more. Okay. Your doctor, police officer, this can be quite tricky for people, particularly if they have moved areas, moved states, and they may not necessarily know people in those areas. Sometimes you may have to email the stuff to them or post it to them and get them to sign it and post it back to you if your witness is, you know, not someone who's close by. As migration agents, we're allowed to complete these forms. We never used to be able to, but I think about a year and a half ago, or maybe nearly 2 years, I can't remember now, we're allowed to sign these too. So it's really good if we've helped families with their permanent visas in the first place, and we go on to helping them with this type of stuff, or if we've done other types of work, not necessarily permanent visas, because we can act as witness.
Mm. And the good thing is with these documents, you just need to take a clear colour photograph of the original document, and you can upload that to your application. You don't need to have it certified by a JP. All you need is a clear photograph. And the best way to take those photographs is directly above the document in a nice room with good lighting, because sometimes when you take those photos and you're on an angle, it's not very clear, and you want to make it easy for the case officer when they're processing your documents and looking at your information, and you don't want to have them have to come back to you and write to you and say, hey, can you resend this? So always try and make sure that those photos are nice and clear and in colour.
Yeah, or if you're IT savvy, you might know how to use a scan feature, or you might have a scanner that you can use. But I think everyone has a smartphone nowadays, and you can use that. I recommend taking the photo of the document in the natural sunlight outside if you can, because that seems to be the best exposure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Want to go through this one?
Yeah, so applying under the at birth rule, what you will need is evidence of the parent's status at the time of birth. So for things like an Australian passport, an Australian birth certificate, the parent's Australian birth certificate. Perhaps you have a permanent resident grant letter. For example, someone who's been granted a partner visa. You could include that letter. And also movement records to show that they are an eligible New Zealand citizen. Movement records can be applied for free through the Department of Home Affairs website. Even if you just did movement records, did a Google search movement records, it should come up, and it's with a link to the Department of Home Affairs website.
Yeah, we've also got a link on our website too on the tips on how to apply for various details. So that takes you to the department website if you get stuck.
Perfect.
And I wonder.
Oh, and that last one, some people have a Centrelink letter that would have been issued to them, 20 years ago, most probably over 20 years ago, which also provides a certificate of residence.
Yeah,
that's another good document to include when applying for the at birth rule.
Yeah, and I've just thought of one other that I could add to this list is maybe your parent has got an Australian Citizenship Certificate themselves.
That's it,
That's nothing we can add to that list, because it shows what date they were granted citizenship, and if it was before you were born, then, or your child was born, then you can show that what status the parent was before the birth of the child.
Yes.
Okay, you can go through some.
Applying under the 10-year rule, evidence that your child was born in Australia and evidence that they were living in Australia from birth to their 10th birthday. And I suppose you can be really creative with this as well. But the good thing, good evidence is immunisation records, letter from the school reports, travel records, even sometimes photographs, school photographs. Especially for those who, maybe in their 20s, 30s, and then trying to find those immunisation records or getting a letter from the school might be difficult. But if you have photographs from your school or the yearbook from your school, maybe you're in a yearbook that shows that you were attending school at that time. Those are sorts of things. You can think outside the box a bit when coming up with evidence of showing that you were living here from birth to your 10th birthday, to the child's 10th birthday.
Yeah, even sports photographs, how you have team photos in the year, things like that, and your name's written on it. So long as they can. But generally speaking, these are probably the most common types of evidence that the department will accept. The others they may accept in part. They may need a bit more more rounded evidence, evidence of bank account when you're a child, but those things can be a bit trickier to get a hold of. That's why if you do this whilst your children are young, it's easier to get a hold of that evidence rather than when they're much older.
And the actual form itself, the online form, can sometimes prompt you as to the types of evidence that they will need you to upload. So we're just going to go into that process now about how to apply. It is done online. It's an online application process. And the first step really is to gather all of your evidence that you need and prepare it so that it's ready to be uploaded. So as we mentioned earlier, gather all of your documents that you need, take good clear photos or clear scans of those documents and have them ready on a desktop or in a file, somewhere where you can find it, because you'll need to be able to find it when you start the application. You'll need to complete all of the information and then start to upload the documents that they are asking. And so if you have that in a folder, it'll be easy when you're looking for them to upload into the form.
And I don't know if I've said this, but with those colour photographs or scans of those documents, they don't actually need to be witnessed and signed by a JP, say. So that's the beauty about doing online applications. And it is an online application pretty much only now, to my understanding. We used to be able to fill out a form 119 and post that in the mail as well. If you post applications to the department, you generally need to get things certified as well. But if it's an online process, it is much easier because you don't need to have those documents certified. But you can also track the progress of your application if you do it online. And if the department come back and request further information, then you can quickly upload it to your online application. You don't have to go through a lot of rigmarole trying to get them the document through other portals or posting it or things like that. So online is definitely much better anyway.
You're right. Applying online is actually the only way you can apply now.
Yeah, I thought so. So to do the account, you need to create what's called an IMI account. And we do have a link on our website, which we'll show you afterwards. We have got specific instructions on our website on how to do this and link you back to the Department of Home Affairs website. So this is where you would need to set up your account if you want to do this on your own. If you decide to use our services, then we've got our IMI account already, so we can, do it that way. So steps 3 and 4, select new application. So we actually kind of guide you, and it is more explained again on our website, but this is just to give you a bit of an overview. So these are this is the words that you would select once you've got your IMI account set up. You want to click on new application, then citizenship. And then under citizenship, it will have different types of citizenship, like citizenship by conferral, citizenship by descent, resume Australian citizenship, and it'll also have evidence of citizenship. But this goes for both the birth or 10 birthday rule, so there's no different forms to fill out. And the answer all the questions. So when you go into the online form, make sure you answer all the questions and follow each page through to the end. upload all the required documents like what Kath was saying. It will only accept files that are a certain size and a certain format. So, you know, you can go there and check all that out. When we prepare people's applications, we'll request the documents. Normally people will email them through to us. We then go through a whole process of preparing all of those documents, their file size, their file format, labeling them. We make sure we label and name everything so that we've got a clear record of what we've given to the department. And that's what's really important too, is that you have a record of everything that you provide. And just be mindful that whatever you upload after you lodge your application, you can't actually go back and see what you've uploaded. You can see the title or the label, but you can't actually open up the document to double check, do I upload the right one? So that's why we always keep a file and a folder with everything exactly as we've uploaded it. And that's why it's important to label it. Because, you know, sometimes when you scan documents, it might come out with like 20 digits or letters of the alphabet, like just some crazy. That's not going to help you if you ever need to go back and check on things. And we recommend explaining the applicant's circumstances and why they meet the criteria. So there'll be sections throughout the application where it says, you know, is there any further information you want to provide? And, or, you know, any other points you want to point out. So we always write in there, if either of the parents were Australian citizens, permanent residents, or eligible New Zealand citizens, we always write about that. So this is an insight into how we do things, but you need to be very organised, very clear, know why your child qualifies, and you know, and if you can explain that, that'll help your application be processed, I think, a lot quicker, because it just makes it easier for the department. And then once all documents are uploaded, you click next, and payment details can be entered. You know, that's when you enter your details. But, you know, again, be very careful, make sure it is the official Department of Home Affairs website. We have heard of people lodging different types of applications through what they thought was the Department of Home Affairs website, and it turned out it wasn't. It was some scam website. So you have to be really careful. Make sure you are diligent, do your homework. Like I said, on our website we've got the actual links so that you can't hopefully go wrong in that. But just always be on guard, because you know how sophisticated scammers are and how they keep getting more and more sophisticated. Okay, so for more information. Oh yes, so
sorry,
Kathleen
Erina,
will
I just put the
link. Perfect. So Kath will put the link into our thread as well. So
applications are costing $240 too, as well, just to let them know the cost. It's $140, but there is a small credit card fee as well that they normally charge. So it's a couple of dollars, or I think it is, isn't it, Erina?
Yeah, 1.4% of it. So I think it's like $3 something extra. And so this is our website. If you go to our website, you'll see it'll look something like this. And under the Australian Citizenship tab, we've got Evidence of Citizenship and Certificate. So this is where you go to our website. I will pull our website up quickly in a little while, just to walk you through. And this is kind of what it looks like. So we've actually taken screenshots of the department's website, what it looks like when you've got your IMI account ready to go, and step-by-step instructions. Okay, and for more information, go to our website. You can, as Kath said earlier, you can book a free callback and quick assessment with either of us. We're happy to help you at no charge. We can help very quickly if you just want to know whether your child qualifies or not. And as you were saying, we also offer a paid service to those who may like us to do the applications on their behalf. Paid service, it's normally around, depends on the type of case, but we normally allocate 3 hours of our time to be able to work on a case. So you're looking at about $1,400-$1,500 if you wanted us to do it. That's just our price. You can shop around and look for other agents that may do it as well, but that's just what we charge. And we do an end-to-end service. So we take care of everything from the very beginning. You just need to provide us with the information that we need, and we'll get that done for you quick, smart.
Processing times, of course, vary for the applications. So sometimes it can take, less than a week, and sometimes it can take a month or two. But it is generally a quick process if you have all of the information ready and easy for the case officer when they're making a decision.
And look, we're very passionate about this area of children getting their citizenship certificates, because we see lots and lots of real life examples where children are being disadvantaged because they don't have this correct evidence. We have seen real life situations where parents are given incorrect advice and information, particularly by other government departments as well, and their children are missing out on valuable support, help, things that they are rightfully entitled to. They're missing out on that. So that's why this is so important. And Kath and I are happy to give up our time to talk about this, to help people out there get this information for their children, because they need it. We had a dad, we talked about this last Friday, but we had a father of 4 call us. He had been in Australia for a number of years. His 4 children were born here. He wasn't an eligible New Zealand citizen, and neither was his wife. They had 4 children. 2 of their children had have disabilities, and the other 2 children were okay. He was told by 3 different departments, government departments and workers, that his children are not Australian citizens. The youngest one was 9 years old, turning 10 soon. So the problem was that 2 of his children with disabilities were not able to get NDIS support because they kept getting told that they weren't Australian citizens. They were also told that because their children had disabilities, they wouldn't be granted Australian citizenship. That information is absolutely incorrect. Again, it's people who take a bit of knowledge from here and there, mix it all up, and they get their wires crossed. The health requirement only comes in on visa applications. It's got nothing to do with citizenship. You don't have to pass medicals for citizenship. You don't have to meet certain age requirements for citizenship. These can be things that people have to overcome, maybe in visa applications. So it's really, really important to get that right information. And honestly, when this father spoke to us, he came through one of a service provider. He struggled to believe us, even though we're specialists in this area. He struggled to believe us because one would tend to trust government departments over professionals. But I had to reassure him that what we were saying is correct, and that the best advice we can give him is apply for Australian Citizenship Certificates. That way it ends all arguments, all debates, and his children can get the help that they deserve and that they need. So yeah, he was just absolutely blown away. But that's just one of many, and we only know the tip of the iceberg with what comes across our way. Goodness knows what's going on across the entire country when it comes to children born, particularly to New Zealand citizens. Okay, Huikana, thank you so much for your presentation. Valuable information. It's interesting to hear that they won't notify you when your 10 years is eligible, so you would need to apply for the citizenship certificate. That's exactly right. Yeah. So people do assume that there must be something that happens if it's by operation of law, but it's almost invisible. It only becomes activated when you actively apply, which is why it's so important to make that application.
So you've got friends, you have family members who have children born here. Please, and they haven't applied for an Australian Citizenship Certificate, please forward this onto them, because we want this to get around to as many people as possible, so that so many children can obtain Australian citizenship, get that certificate, be able to get a passport, be able to join the police force, Navy, you name it, that we want them to have all the access to all of the opportunities that are available here in Australia, because that's why you brought them here. That's why you've had them here, to have opportunities, better opportunities. So we want them to be able to access that, and that is often by having that Australian Citizenship Certificate in the first place.
Yeah, and higher education too, student loans, student allowances. We've heard stories of young people finishing high school and going off to work because one, they needed to help bring income into the household to support their family, but probably more disturbingly is they wanted to go off to do higher education. They had potential, they had talent, they had ability, but because they believed they weren't Australian citizens for whatever reason, they thought that that was not an option for them. And I think that's a real injustice to young people. And, by getting good education and taking those opportunities really makes sense, where people can become more skilled. People that are more skilled and more better equipped are also, I think, able to contribute to society, get higher paying jobs, pay more in taxes. It benefits government if we all pay higher taxes, all that kind of stuff. It just makes sense. I don't understand why they make it so hard for our kids, but that's why we want to try and make this knowledge accessible by everyone. This shouldn't be stuff that's hidden and only, for government and migration agents and such to know, our little secret. This is something that's really important, that should be available to all children, and our children depend on us as parents and grandparents sometimes to know the right information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I think that's it. So what I okay. This we've got Australian citizenship. So this is where we talk about the citizenship. Is it that one? I think it's
Yes, that one.
I've got to go back to if I click on that, it'll open up the other page. So I'll just work that out and fix it up. But that's, if you go to our page, it'll have a lot of drop-down menus and things. There's another page before this, but I can't get into it because it keeps coming up with that. But I'll fix that and leave it there. So hopefully you enjoyed today, and we will see you perhaps next time. Stop share. And Kate's still here in South Australia with me, which is amazing, but she's only got one more week and we're now the time's going too fast.
Yes, I've really enjoyed my time here. It's a beautiful, beautiful part here of Australia, Narracourt, South Australia. And if you're ever in the neighbourhood, I'm sure Erina would welcome you if you came to stop by for a visit. Thank you everyone again for joining us. May you have a wonderful weekend. And we'll be sure to join you next week. I think it might be an early live because I'm traveling again on Friday next week.
Oh yes, we'll probably do a Thursday live next week. Yeah, that's for sure. All right, take care everyone. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye.